hello, and thank you for joining us on Searching for Answers. I have a contingent of helpers that'll just blow your mind because they have wonderful answers. I don't know what they're talking about some of the time, but I'm listening, and maybe I'll learn. But anyway, my name is Carolyn Thompson, and on my right is...
Richard Rice, Loma Linda University.
John Jones, La Sierra University.
Bernard Taylor, Loma Linda University Church.
Ivan Blazin, Loma Linda University.
And I'm going to ask you, would you start reading for us? And what chapter are we in?
We're in 1 Corinthians 15.
Okay.
And we are at verse 29.
Your favorite verse.
He's the one he wanted to omit.
You're not supposed to say that.
Oh, I didn't. I'm just kidding.
I get to read it. My New Testament friends will explain it.
Okay.
It's a one-verse paragraph in essence. Otherwise, what will those people do who receive baptism on behalf of the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized on their behalf? And why are we putting ourselves in danger every hour? I die every day. That is as certain, brothers and sisters, as my boasting of you, a boast that I make in Christ Jesus our Lord. If with merely human hopes I fought with wild animals at Ephesus, what would I have gained by it if the dead are not raised? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. Come to a sober and right mind and sin no more, for some people have no knowledge of God. I say this to your shame.
Wow. Do you know what you just read? I don't think I quite understand all of that. Do you?
Well, there are some attempts that we can make.
Okay, go for it,
For
Ivan.
example, on verse 29,
Yeah.
what will those people do who receive baptism on behalf of the dead if there is no resurrection? What's the point of this? Well, first of all, you can consider two groups of people as possibilities here. Believers being baptized in behalf of dead ones, perhaps believing relatives who died before they had a chance to be baptized, and these may now be baptized in reference to them. Or it could possibly be non-believers, the pagans who are getting baptized because they've lost Christian relatives, and they've heard their Christian relatives talk about the resurrection from the dead and so on. And so they're baptized hoping that, well, if there's something to this, then we will meet them in that final time. So those are like two possible ways of going, and probably a lot more than that.
You mean there may have been people then who were baptized without fully accepting the gospel as a way of sort of hedging their bets?
That there's power in the ritual.
Power in the ritual. I'd like that. I might be quoting. So please baptize me, and if there's anything to it, then I'll enjoy the benefit.
Well, and the benefit in this case would be to join your loved ones, you see, who were believers. So it's either believers being baptized in behalf of other believers who had died before getting baptized, or possibly, and this is the Mormon point of view, believers being baptized for others, hoping that by that baptism, proxy baptism, that they will make it possible for them to make their way to the kingdom of God.
Do you think it's because of these few verses that they baptize for the dead?
Oh, yes.
I think
did.
these verses reflect the practice that's already there. Paul is not prescribing this. He's arguing once again from experience.
Exactly.
Here is ritual experience.
Yes.
That's right.
He's saying, look at what you do. You're doing this. What's the use of it unless there's such a thing as resurrection eventually, when we'll all be together. So
he's not affirming it or condemning it. It's sort of like a rhetorical look. If you didn't believe this, why would you do this? So it's not,
That's
not like
his
he's
point.
saying, I'm certainly glad you're doing this, or I wish you'd stop. It's just...
Yeah.
Well, this is on a level, isn't it, with the earlier fact that we agreed that there was this spiritual baptism that was taking place, and this is being done. If there's no resurrection, why do it? And Rick, did I understand you correctly, as at least what I heard when you were saying was, here is somebody who is not his or herself a believer, and so the prospect is zero for, left to its own, if things continue as they currently are. So why not? There's nothing to lose.
Well, I was just wondering if that fit within the framework that Ivan was laying out for us. In other words, I'm not sure about this, but
Yeah.
I'd like to be
Sure.
part of it if it's true.
Yes.
Kind of a thing.
And Paul, as you said, John, Paul doesn't approve it or condemn it. He cites it as a fact of what was going on and says it doesn't make any sense at all if there is no resurrection.
Yes.
So that's an appeal to the practice, but it doesn't go too far in
endorsing it.
in endorsing it. That's right.
This let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die.
Yeah.
Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Come back to your senses as you ought, and stop sinning. For there are some who are ignorant of God. I say this to your shame.
I
I
think
have the
No, I want to hear what you
well,
say,
I have
Ivan.
the feeling. I have well, there's a number of things, but I'll just look at one here. And bad company ruins good morals. Now, that's put in quotation marks as if it's like a saying. I think the way Paul is applying it, is that if you go associating yourself with those who deny these fundamentals of the Christian faith, such as the resurrection from the dead, that will have a reaction on your moral life. If you associate with those who are deniers, that may well corrupt good morals, you see?
You know what, I get the feeling that Paul is just toward the end of this section, not the end of the chapter, because we haven't gotten to, in many ways, the heart of it. It's like he's just loading on one reason after another.
Yes, he
It's
is.
like he starts out, as John indicated in an earlier session, very logically,
Yeah.
establishing a foundation. Now, as he comes to the end of this section, it's like saying, look, if there's no resurrection of the dead, why are you doing this? And furthermore, why did I have, go through what I went through?
Nothing
And
makes
then
sense.
why don't we just throw it all in and
Eat, drink, and
party
be
away? Because this life is it. It's almost like he's stopped with the good reasons and he's given the the less impressive.
He's reaching a little now.
It's almost like the way I wound up trying to argue with my teenagers. You come up with the good arguments, and when you feel that they're not making much, you just, you know what I mean? You get a little frantic. Now, I know I'm underestimating the apostle's mind here, but it's almost like, wait a minute, why are we putting ourselves in danger every hour? Look at what I'm going through. I fought with wild animals at Ephesus. Maybe you want to talk about what that is. And in addition to that, if the dead are not raised, well, then let's eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Now, wait a minute. It's like he's saying, do you realize where this line of thought will take you?
Right.
Bad company ruins good morals. What if you did that? Eat, drink, and look at the morals you're going to have. And then he says, come to a sober and right mind, please. And I'm saying this to your shame. It's almost like he's ending up saying, shame on you for even denying this. Have I
Yeah, you got it pretty well.
have I caricatured this, or is
What's the author's name who wrote The Problem of Pain?
C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis?
C.S.
Oh, well,
Lewis.
that's C.S. Lewis. But our friend from North Carolina who wrote on pain and death and so on, he wrote all kinds of books. Jesus, I can't for somehow... I'm thinking of this scholar who's very prominent now, and for some reason I'm forgetting his name. But anyway...
It's not
it'll come-
Philip Yancey. It's
No.
popular.
Yeah, it's...
Bart Ehrman?
Bart
Bart
Ehrman.
Ehrman.
That's
Okay,
the
the
one.
New Testament scholar,
Yeah.
your area.
And he came from a very conservative background, and he steadily, as he studied manuscripts first of all of the New Testament, and then kept going, he came to the place where he believed less and less and less, and then he got himself to the place of agnosticism and almost to the place of atheism. And this idea, he says right out in his book on suffering and so on, that he agrees with this philosophy: let us eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. So we might as well enjoy this life, and he adds just one thing to it. And that's interesting to me. And help others.
Yeah.
His favorite book is Ecclesiastes. See?
Clearly.
Death is eternal for Ecclesiastes. And that's where he ends up. So the Christian thing isn't moving him. This chapter apparently doesn't give him the solace that I think it's giving us here today.
Well, it's interesting that people want to put in the coda that you just indicated, and that is help others. Because I think the rationale for helping others is not entirely consistent with the worldview that they've just committed themselves to. See, in other words,
On what basis?
what is it that gives value to everyone? Why shouldn't you just assume that you are favored, fortune has favored you, there's no real reason why, but just enjoy it, and others are left to their own fate. I share very much the sentiment that we should help others, and I applaud those who do for whatever reason or lack of reason, but I still think that the foundation of the ethic that reaches out to affirm the value of others is provided for us in the Bible, in the Judeo-Christian tradition that affirms the value of all humanity. And you really can't just sort of jettison the tradition and hang on to that element as if that's perfectly obvious for all of us to have. That's what, well, another writer on the mentality that most of us live with, the secular age, Charles, he calls that a kind of a subtraction narrative. You can take part of the tradition and get rid of the stuff you don't like and still have a fully world-affirming and other-affirming way of living. So I see that as a tremendous inconsistency.
I had a class one time, and we came to this whole idea of resurrection and life beyond death. And a number of students in my class said, we don't need a life beyond. If death is forever, no matter to us. And I pondered that. Do they really mean it? Has some other kind of mentality or emotional, psychological something come into their existence that makes them say such a thing? They weren't kidding. That's one thing I knew. They were not kidding.
How old were they?
They were university students.
Forgive me, I'm going to say something patronizing. They may not be convinced that they're absolutely going to die. I remember a university student years ago commenting about some of the risky activities. I don't want to specify it for fear of offending some of our listeners possibly. But there were some very risky recreational activities, physically challenging, that people were, his friends were engaging in. And I expressed, aren't they concerned about the potential consequences of this? And the answer was, well, sure, but they've calculated that, and if life ends, it ends. Well, perhaps for somebody healthy and strong and so on in the prime of life, death may appear inconsequential. But when you visit a hospital or you come to a sense of your own mortality, or you lose somebody you love, you realize it isn't inconsequential. It is an enemy. It's not something. So how did you respond to this, Simon?
Well, I told him that I find that very difficult at this point to believe. Maybe there was the age difference between me and them that makes me find that a very difficult proposition, and maybe for your psychological reasons that you gave, they're not concerned. But I didn't know whether to take them seriously or not, or if there is another kind of philosophy, kind of an alien philosophy that leads them to think it doesn't matter. Even a teacher right here once said, well, eternal death, no problem. Now, I was in a restaurant today, and this couple that my wife and I see every once in a while, they're up in their 80s, and they came by, and this woman said, I'm getting older, and I don't know how long it's going to be until then. And she says, it fills me with fear to contemplate this thing. Well, I think it fills most of us with fear. but maybe youth has some other thing.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering if that isn't tantamount to a denial of death.
Yeah.
It sounds that for them they're saying death isn't an enemy. And I wonder to what extent they've fully looked at it
Ernst
in the face.
Becker in his book, The Denial of Death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Paul doesn't deny it. The last enemy. He
That's
calls
right.
it the last enemy. And that really takes up the Hebrew mentality where the body and so on, life is affirmed and so on, so that death is really an enemy. It wasn't natural. It wasn't meant to be here.
Yeah.
And there's a story in the Bible of how it got to be here.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, Judaism and Christianity have this in common, as does Islam also. Death is never prettified or kind of painted beautiful in beautiful tones. Death in all three of those religions is a horror, and the metaphor of sleep was used, of course, in the Greco-Roman world as well by Gentiles. They used it, however, in a different way than the Christians did. They used the same metaphor, but in order to prettify it. You can see inscriptions on catafalques, on sarcophagus lids. Farewell, sweet Lucretia, may your slumber be ever sweet, kind of, or simply R.I.P., requiescat in pacem, rest in peace. That was a way of just kind of saying, well, it's really like sleeping. Christians use the metaphor precisely to get at not its beauty. They saw always death as a horror, but rather to speak of its reversibility. You can wake up from sleep. Sleep can be reversed. Excuse me. And so in that way, I think they use the same metaphor, but to a very different purpose, building on a very different understanding. The question, however, of eating and drinking, for tomorrow we die, I think is not a denial of death. It is kind of pushing it off to the edges of one's consciousness. But in a way, it looks like there were even some Christians who were prepared to say this. Paul quotes it, but I think he's rounding off something that is opened up already back in chapter 6. You remember there you have people who, in the name of Christ, in this kind of great all-inclusiveness, they are indeed lords of and masters of the world, so to speak. They rule, can say, all things are mine. The stomach's made for food, food for the stomach. Clearly the same kind of attitude here. So it is not simply pagan Epicurean philosophers who are saying this. Some are saying it in the name of Christ. And interestingly enough, Paul turns precisely here to a pagan source to refute them, because you're headed toward a destruction of your morals. Menander was an Athenian playwright who lived about 400 years, I believe, before Christ. He wrote a lot of plays, 60 or 80 of them. Only a couple have survived. But in one of them, there is this saying, bad company destroys good morals. And I think Paul wants to say, look, even the Greeks know where this attitude leads. So you Christians should certainly know better.
Yeah.
I really thought it. I can't help but wonder, Ivan, if somebody denies that death really matters, if there's a sense in which they're saying life doesn't really matter. And that brings to mind, and I've heard this, I can't footnote it, but you find statements among the Stoics to the effect that, I don't know if this is on a tomb or just somebody expressed, I was not, I was, I am not, I care not.
I care not.
It doesn't matter that
make
I'm
any
gone because it doesn't matter that I was ever here. So just the whole thing is reduced to insignificance.
Well, Seneca, the tutor of Nero,
right.
in
Brother
his,
of Gallio.
Yes, right,
Okay.
the same.
I think we got him.
The same. Writes in his moral epistles a very casual attitude toward both life and death.
That's what I think they go together.
Yeah, that's right. Just, it's like the we would say today, the coffee dregs at the bottom of the cup. Toss it out, when you come to that point and be done with it. He goes on at some length about that. Just let it go, Interestingly enough, when it came time for Nero to commit suicide, he couldn't do it. Maybe
Needed some
Seneca
help.
Seneca didn't drill the lesson home, so he needed some help. But yeah.
It's interesting here, if I may. If you asked the Corinthians, do you believe in resurrection, they would have said yes.
Yes, they would have said it.
Yeah.
And what Paul has delineated to this point is to show the difference the time sequence makes. And there are, today people say, well, yeah, I believe, but, I see it a little differently. It really doesn't make any difference. But by the time Paul has finished between past and future, the whole of Christianity is standing in the balance in the light of this argument. And I love the clarity of thought despite its difficulty, and would love to, be able to face all of my issues and conflicts and differences of opinion in that way. It truly is remarkable the difference it makes, and what I thought was just a minor point, I find is like everything is sand that's through my fingers. I can't hold anything. I'm left with a few grains on my hands, and that's it. Because I put the resurrection in the past? Really? It's that important? As you said earlier, Ivan, how blessed we are that these issues were raised, that we have the answers to these that we can read and understand.
But it's interesting to me that what to our Christian consciousness is so very important, and it really is, to others of other religions, certain ones, it's of no importance. For example, I've had some very marvelous Hindu students in my classes at times, as probably some of the rest of us have. And of course, the idea of resurrection to them is the problem from which we need to have redemption.
Yeah, that's right.
They want to become disembodied, and they want to rid themselves of individuality. We treasure the body and individuality, and they want to merge again with the world soul, like the drop put back into the ocean again. They don't want to have an individual consciousness. Now see, this to them is not a message of hope. It's a message of, wow.
Prolongation of
the problem.
Yeah.
So how do you get through to people like that?
Well, Paul's answer to that is, but it's in a different form. It wouldn't be a blessing in the same form.
Exactly.
But in a different form, it's a blessing.
Well, you both know more about that particular religion than I do, but my sense is that an individual self is so linked up with suffering that the only way to escape suffering is to somehow lose that identity that you as an individual self have. And so that is what redemption consists of. There will be no more suffering because there won't be a you to suffer.
Yeah.
And I think we have a quite different answer to the question here, where Paul speaks about a transformation that will take us beyond the realm of suffering to a realm of complete, unimpeded fulfillment. Am I right?
Yes, and it's a realm in which body plays a key role. Body.
And
Some
self.
Some want to divest themselves of the body. For Paul, he can't think of that. He has to think, and does think, of transformation of the body.
And so this is the huge question he raises in verse 35.
That's it. So we come to that now.
How are the dead raised?
Yeah, and that how in verse 35 is really a how. It introduces this word pos, how. It introduces an impossibility. How is it even possible to think that dead people rise? It just doesn't make sense. And this is echoing, of course, the Corinthians.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't make
their
sense.
Question.
Because again, they don't have the idea of transformation of body. They only have the idea of resuscitation, and that, of course, won't go at all.
So what he's established so far is the indispensability the absolute necessity of affirming the resurrection.
Yes.
And now he's physical resurrection, and now he's going to say, okay,
The nature.
to make that fly, I've got to
Talk about the
talk
nature
about
of it.
how this actually can happen, and what
Yes.
we're talking about.
What kind of physicality?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So here we are. Which
Here
is
we are with a little over a minute left.
And the big
uh,
question right in front of us.
Yeah, what is
Well,
the
here-
big
this-
question? Go ahead and say
The
it.
question, well, let me just say, the question is, are there two questions here or one? How are the dead raised? And then it says, with what kind of a body do they come? Are those two questions? How is it possible to conceive of a resurrection of the dead? And secondly, if you could conceive of it, what kind of a body would they have?
Would they have,
See?
exactly.
Now maybe that's just one question. How are the dead raised? That is to say, what kind of body would they possibly have? And that he has to answer that question. And his answer there, we can say one word, fool. That's pretty tough.
Paul is a rhetorician after all,
Right.
isn't he?
What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. Now there, that leaves us with something to think about.
All right, on that note, well, until next time, we'll have to think about that, Ivan. We have about 30 seconds left, and I hope that our viewers have gone along with this and I hope they understand what we're trying to say, because it's a little difficult. Some of these things are hard to understand, especially if you're maybe reading it for the first time. But I want our viewers to stick with us, because we keep going over it, and hopefully you'll like it. Thank you.